The forest of Stonehurst held its breath. It was a silence unique to the hunt, a hush that was not peaceful, but taut, stretched thin as a bowstring. Every creature, from the shrew in the undergrowth to the crow on the high branch, seemed to know that the master of the land was present, and he was bent on an act of finality. Alaric, the Duke of Westmarch, was not a man given to idle pleasures. He did not hunt for the camaraderie or the sport. He hunted for the clean, cold moment of decision. The world, with its endless petitions, its political maneuverings, its cloying social obligations, fell away in the face of a single, pure objective. Today, that objective was the great stag of the West Woods. For 3 seasons, the beast had eluded him. It was a creature of myth, its antlers a crown of impossible size, its coat the colour of burnished autumn. The tenants spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. They called it the King of the Wood, and Alaric, a king in his own domain, could not abide a rival. Now he had it. Cornered in a clearing of ancient oaks, the stag stood, its great chest heaving, its breath misting in the cool morning air. It was magnificent. It was perfect. And it was his. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, the stock smooth and familiar against his cheek. The metal was cool, an extension of his own will. His companions, Lord Harrington and Sir Marcus, held back, their own horses stamping and snorting, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and awe. They knew the Duke's moods. They knew to be silent at a moment like this. Alaric sighted down the barrel. The world narrowed to the small circle of his vision. The stag's proud head, the dark, intelligent eye, the patch of thick hide just behind the shoulder, where the heart beat its strong, steady rhythm. He exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. A clean shot. An ending. And then movement. It was a flicker at the edge of the clearing, so incongruous that for a moment he thought it was a trick of the light, a doe breaking cover. But it was not. A figure, small and slight, emerged from the shadow of an oak. A girl. No, a woman, though she was of that indeterminate age where service had worn away the bloom of youth without yet replacing it with the settled lines of maturity. She wore the plain grey dress of a lower housemaid, a garment designed for invisibility. Her hair was a simple brown, pulled back so tightly it sharpened the pale oval of her face. She did not cry out. She did not wave her arms. She simply walked, with a deliberate, unhurried pace, from the shelter of the trees directly into the line of fire. She stopped not 5 feet from the great stag, turning her back to the animal and her face to the Duke. 1 second. 2. The world, which had been silent, was now frozen. Lord Harrington let out a choked gasp. Sir Marcus swore under his breath. The horses shifted, sensing the sudden, violent shift in tension. Alaric did not lower the rifle. His arm was a rod of iron. His eye was still fixed, but his focus had shifted. The stag, magnificent as it was, had become scenery. The girl was now the centre of his world. She was nothing. A scullery maid, a laundry girl, a face he had likely passed 1,000 times in the cavernous halls of Stonehurst, and never once registered. She was dust and drudgery, a creature of the background. And she was standing before him, a small grey stone in his path, defying him. His voice, when it came, was low and lethal. Move. It was not a request. It was a command that had never, in his 34 years, been disobeyed on his own land. It was the voice that sent men to Parliament and ships to war. The girl did not move. She did not even flinch. Her hands were clasped before her, her knuckles white. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. They were a clear, calm grey-green, the colour of a forest pool, and they met his without fear, without supplication, without any of the deference he was owed. I said, "Move," he repeated, the words cracking like a whip. Behind her, the stag, sensing an opportunity, took a hesitant step, then another, its antlers brushing against the back of her dress. She did not seem to notice. Her entire being was focused on him, on the rifle, on the space between them. A slow fury began to build in Alaric's chest. It was a cold, unfamiliar fire. He was being made a fool of, in front of his guests, by a servant. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Who was she? What madness possessed her to throw her life away for a beast? "Do you know who I am?" he snarled, the question an absurdity. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was as quiet as her dress, yet it carried across the clearing with perfect clarity. "You are the Duke of Westmarch, Your Grace, and you are a stone's throw from being dismissed from this life, not just this estate, for the last time. Step aside." Her chin lifted, a fractional, almost imperceptible movement. "No, Your Grace." The word hung in the air, a thing of impossible weight. No. He could shoot. He could pull the trigger, and the ball would pass through her thin body and into the animal behind. The thought was chilling, but it was there. It would be a lesson, an assertion of his will. But his finger, a moment ago so certain, was now frozen. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a defiant servant, but an immovable object. She was shielding the stag, not with aggression, but with a profound and baffling stillness. She had made her body a sanctuary. The moment stretched. The stag, emboldened, finally broke. With a crash of undergrowth, it turned and bounded back into the deep woods, its white tail a flag of victory. It was gone. The girl remained, a statue in the empty clearing. With a sound of pure, frustrated rage, Alaric lowered the rifle. He did not slam it down. His movements were always controlled, precise. But the energy behind the action was volcanic. He swung himself down from his horse, his boots landing hard on the damp earth. He strode towards her, his fury a palpable wave. His companions watched, aghast. This was a side of the Duke they rarely saw. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He was a mountain of fine wool and cold anger, towering over her. "Your name," he commanded. "Elara Vance, Your Grace." Elara Vance. He said the name, as if tasting something bitter. "And what position do you hold in my household, Elara Vance, that gives you the right to interfere with my hunt?" "I am a laundress, Your Grace." A laundress? He almost laughed. It was too absurd. A washerwoman had faced him down. "A laundress," he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you believe your duties extend to game management?" "No, Your Grace. I believe my duties extend to not standing by while a beautiful thing is killed for no reason." The honesty of it struck him like a physical blow. Not for food, not for a cull, but for sport, for a trophy, for his pride. She had seen the truth of it and named it, simply and without embellishment. "You are dismissed," he said, the words like chips of ice. "Pack your things. You will be off Stonehurst land by sunset." He expected tears. He expected pleading. He received nothing. The clear, steady gaze did not waver. She simply gave a small, formal curtsy, a gesture of profound and heartbreaking dignity in her plain grey dress. "As you wish, Your Grace." Then she turned and walked back the way she had come, her back straight, her head held high. She did not run. She did not hurry. She simply disappeared into the trees, leaving the Duke of Westmarch standing alone in a clearing that felt suddenly terribly empty. He stood there for a long time, long after his companions had cautiously approached. Lord Harrington cleared his throat. "Damned insolence, Alaric. Shall I have the men see her off the grounds?" Alaric did not answer. He was watching the space where she had vanished. The scent of damp earth and gunpowder filled the air. The hunt was over. The stag was gone. But he felt with a certainty that unsettled him to his very core that something far more significant had just been captured. Or perhaps had just escaped. He was not sure which. All he knew was the name, Elara Vance, and the image of her small, unyielding figure against the backdrop of the ancient woods. The Duke's command was law. Elara Vance knew this as she knew the sting of lie on her hands and the ache in her back from the heavy linen sheets. A word from him could alter a life, end it, or in her case, uproot it entirely. She did not return to the main house. To do so would be to invite the questions and stares of the other staff, to become the center of a storm of gossip she had no desire to weather. Instead, she took the winding path that led to the small, damp cottage she shared with 2 other junior laundry maids near the river. Her belongings were few. A change of dress, a well-worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, a small wooden bird her father had carved for her before he died, and a handful of pressed flowers between the pages of the book. It took less than 10 minutes to wrap them in a spare shawl. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were a currency she could not afford to spend. They were a plea for pity, and pity was a soft, useless thing. She had acted. There were consequences. That was the simple, hard arithmetic of the world. She sat on the edge of her narrow cot, the small bundle at her feet. The sun was beginning to slant through the single small window, meaning the afternoon was waning. By sunset. His words. Where would she go? She had no family left. The position at Stonehurst, secured for her by a distant cousin of her mother's, who was now long dead, was the only home she had known for 5 years. She thought of the stag, the terror in its dark eyes, the trembling of its powerful flanks. She had seen it several times before, on her rare walks in the woods on her half-days off. It was a spirit of the place, wild and free. To see it brought down, to become a head on a wall, a testament to a man's passing whim. She could not bear it. It was not a choice, not really. To have stood by and done nothing would have been a betrayal of something deep within herself, a small, quiet part of her that still believed in sanctuary. So be it. She had bought the stag's life with her own livelihood. It was a fair trade. She stood, smoothed her grey dress, and picked up her bundle. She would walk to the village, perhaps find a place on the mail coach to the next town. A laundress could always find work. There was always dirt in the world. As she opened the cottage door, a figure blocked the light. It was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, a formidable woman with a face like a clenched fist, and a heart that was, Elara suspected, surprisingly soft beneath the starched exterior. "Elara Vance," Mrs. Gable said. Her tone was flat, unreadable. "His Grace wants to see you." Elara's own heart, which had been so steady, gave a small, frightened leap. "He has already dismissed me, Mrs. Gable." "I am aware of what he said. I am also aware of what he is saying now. He is in the library. He wishes to speak with you." Mrs. Gable's eyes, small and sharp, scanned Elara's face, then flickered to the bundle in her hand. "You have not left yet. That is good." Was it? Ilara was not so sure. A reprieve was not the same as a pardon. Sometimes it was merely a prelude to a more thorough condemnation. But she could not refuse a second summons. She set her bundle back on the cot, and followed the housekeeper's rigid back up the path toward the great house. Stonehurst was built to awe. Its stones were hewn from the very land it commanded, great blocks of grey granite that seemed to grow from the earth. It was a fortress of wealth and power, and Ilara had never felt smaller than she did walking through its grand, echoing halls. The portraits of Westmarch dukes, stern and proud, seemed to follow her with their painted eyes. They all looked like him. The same strong jaw, the same air of absolute authority. Mrs. Gable did not speak until they reached the massive double doors of the library. She stopped and turned to Ilara. "I do not know what this is about," she said, her voice low. "I do not ask, but I will say this, girl. The Duke is a hard man, but he is a just man. Answer him plainly. He has no patience for dramatics." Ilara nodded, her throat dry. Mrs. Gable gave a curt nod in return, and pushed one of the doors open, announcing in a formal tone, "Ilara Vance, Your Grace." The library was Alaric's sanctuary, and it was as intimidating as its owner. It was a vast two-story room, walled with books from floor to ceiling. A rolling ladder stood against one wall, a silent testament to the sheer volume of knowledge contained within. The air smelled of leather, paper, and beeswax. A fire crackled in the enormous hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rich wood panelling. The Duke was not at his desk. He was standing by one of the tall arched windows, looking out at the manicured lawns that stretched away toward the darkening woods. He did not turn as she entered. The door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone with him. The silence was as heavy as the house itself. She stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped, waiting. It was what she did best. After a full minute, he spoke, his voice quiet, devoid of the fury from the morning. "The stag has been seen at the southern edge of the estate. It appears unharmed." Ilara did not know what to say to that. She remained silent. He turned from the window. He had changed from his hunting attire into the severe, immaculate black coat and grey waistcoat he wore in the evenings. In the soft light of the fire, he looked less like a force of nature, and more like a man. A tired, formidable man, his storm-grey eyes fixed on her. "You were told to be off the land by sunset." "Yes, Your Grace. I was preparing to leave when Mrs. Gable found me." "Why hadn't you left already? The sun is setting." He gestured to the window, where the sky was streaked with orange and violet. I am a slow packer, Your Grace." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, though almost. "Indeed, with your vast collection of belongings." The words were sardonic, but the anger was gone. It had been replaced by something else. Curiosity. He walked slowly from the window and stopped before a large globe that stood near his desk. He spun it with one finger, watching the continents blur. "This morning," he said, his eyes on the spinning globe, "you told me you acted because you could not stand by while a beautiful thing was killed for no reason." "Yes, Your Grace." "That implies you believe there are reasons for which a thing may be killed." The question was a trap. A philosopher's game. She was a laundress. What did she know of such things? She could only answer with her own simple truth. For food, when one is hungry, Your Grace, or to protect one's home, or one's family. Not for a head on a wall. He stopped the globe, his finger resting on the expanse of the ocean. He looked at her again, and his gaze was sharp, analytical, as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. You risked your life. You certainly risked your livelihood. All for an animal you did not know. I knew it was alive, she said softly, and it wished to remain so. That seemed reason enough. He was silent for a long time, studying her. She felt like a specimen under glass, a strange new insect he was attempting to classify. She bore his scrutiny as she had borne his anger, with a quiet stillness. Mrs. Gable tells me you have been here for 5 years, that you are diligent, quiet, and keep to yourself. As she said, you are unremarkable. He said the word without cruelty, as a statement of fact. That is my preference, Your Grace. And yet today you made yourself the most remarkable person on this entire estate. Why? Why? The question he had been asking himself all day. He wanted an answer that made sense in his world of logic and consequence, of power and position. He wanted to understand the equation that led a powerless girl to defy an all-powerful man. Elara thought for a moment, choosing her words with the care of someone who had so few to spare. Perhaps, Your Grace, it is only when one is unremarkable that one has the freedom to act on what is right, rather than what is expected. The words landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. He stared at her, his mask of ducal indifference finally cracking. He saw it then. It was not madness that had driven her. It was a kind of freedom he had never known. He was bound by his title, his duties, his name. He was the most powerful man for 100 miles, and yet he was a prisoner of expectation. And this girl, this laundress with nothing to her name, was free. You are no longer dismissed, he said, the words abrupt. Elara's head came up. Your Grace, your position is restored. You may return to your duties. He turned away from her, back toward the window, presenting her with his rigid back. It was a dismissal, a different kind of dismissal. She stood for a moment, uncertain. She had been cast out, and now she was recalled, all in the space of an afternoon. Her life felt like a piece of linen, wrung out and snapped straight at his command. Thank you, Your Grace, she whispered to his back. He gave no sign that he heard her. She curtsied to the empty air and let herself out of the library, the heavy door closing with a soft, definitive click. Alaric did not move from the window for a long time. He watched the last light fade from the sky, plunging his perfect lawns into darkness. Unremarkable. She had called herself unremarkable. And yet, she had held a mirror up to him, and he had not liked the reflection. A man who needed to kill a beautiful thing to feel powerful. She had not said the words, but he had heard them all the same. He had brought her back to the library to understand her, to dissect her motives and file her away in his mind as an anomaly, a moment of temporary insanity. Instead, she had left him more unsettled than before. He had intended to reassert his authority, and instead he had pardoned her. More than that, he felt a strange and unwelcome sense of gratitude. She had stopped him from doing something he now felt, in the quiet of his own library, would have diminished him. He walked to his desk, but did not sit. He ran a hand over the polished wood. The house was silent. The day was done. But for the Duke of Westmarch, something was just beginning. He could not stop thinking about her eyes. That clear, steady gaze that had seen him, not as a duke, not as a master, but simply as a man with a rifle, and had found him wanting. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Life at Stonehurst returned to its familiar rhythms, but for two of its inhabitants, the world had fundamentally shifted. On the surface, nothing had changed. The Duke remained a remote, formidable presence, and Alara Vance remained an invisible cog in the great machine of the household. But beneath the surface, a silent awareness had grown between them. Alara returned to the endless cycle of the laundry, the sorting, the soaking, the scrubbing, the rinsing, the wringing, the hanging, the folding. It was hard, repetitive work, but there was a clean, honest satisfaction in it. She kept her head down. She did not speak of the incident in the woods, and when the other servants whispered, she pretended not to hear. They saw her as lucky, or perhaps foolishly brave. They did not understand that for her, it had been neither. It had simply been necessary. But now, as she worked, she felt his eyes on her. Not literally, not at first. It was a subtle change in the atmosphere of the house itself. When she carried a heavy basket of folded linen through the halls, she would sometimes see him at a distance, walking with his steward or a guest, and his gaze would pass over her. Before, it had passed through her. Now it lingered for a fraction of a second. He was aware of her. She had become visible. The library became a place of silent intersection. One of her duties once a week was the light dusting of the books and furniture in the less used wings of the house, a task given to the quietest maids. The library had been added to her rotation. Mrs. Gable had informed her of this with a non-committal grunt, but Alara knew it was no accident. The first time she entered the room after her summons, her heart beat a little faster. It felt like trespassing on holy ground. The Duke was not there. She moved through the vast space with her feather duster, the silence broken only by the soft whisper of the feathers against leather-bound spines. She ran her fingers over the titles. Books were a luxury she had only ever dreamed of. Her father had taught her to read, but the only book they had ever owned was the Bible and her Pilgrim's Progress. Here was a universe of words. She found herself drawn to a small volume of poetry left open on a reading table. Wordsworth. She read a few lines, her lips moving silently. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. The simple beauty of it was a balm. The next week, when she returned, the book was gone. In its place was another, a collection of essays by Emerson. A slip of paper marked a page. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. A message. It had to be. She began to look forward to her library day with a secret, thrilling anticipation. It was a game they played, a conversation held in silence. He would leave a book, and she would read the marked passage, a history of the Roman Republic, a treatise on botany, a translation of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. He was, she realized, educating her. Or perhaps he was trying to understand her, to find the source of her strange courage within the pages of the world's great thinkers. For his part, Alaric found himself drawn to the library at odd hours, rearranging his schedule to coincide with the day the quiet laundress was due to dust. He would watch her from the gallery on the second floor, hidden in the shadows. He told himself it was an experiment. He was studying a phenomenon. He watched her move through his world of words, her touch on the books gentle, reverent. He saw the way her brow would furrow in concentration as she read the passages he left for her, the way a small, secret smile would sometimes touch her lips. She was not just reading the words, she was absorbing them. He started observing her outside the library as well. He learned the rhythms of her day. He saw her leaving a crust of bread on a windowsill for the sparrows. He saw her helping an older kitchen maid carry a heavy pot. He saw her speaking to the horses in the stables, her voice a low, soothing murmur. She moved through the world with a quiet compassion that was utterly foreign to the brittle, performative society he inhabited. The women of his class were taught to be charming, to be witty, to be beautiful. They were not taught to be kind. His life, which had been a fortress of solitude and duty, now had a small, secret window. Looking through it, he saw a world he had never noticed. A world of small kindnesses and quiet dignities that existed right under his nose. And at the center of it was Ilara Vance. This quiet observation might have continued indefinitely, a silent, secret dance, had it not been for the arrival of Lady Camilla Beaumont and her mother. Lady Camilla was, by all accounts, the perfect match for the Duke of Westmarch. Her father was an earl with considerable political influence. Her beauty was legendary, her wit sharp, and her ambition sharper still. It was an unspoken understanding in the ton that she would one day be the Duchess of Westmarch. The match was suitable, advantageous, and expected. Alaric had always accepted this as an inevitability, another duty to be performed. He did not love Camilla. He was not even sure he liked her. But she was a partner who understood the world he lived in, who could manage a great house and host political dinners with flawless grace. It was a transaction, not a romance, and he had long ago made his peace with that. Their arrival shattered the quiet atmosphere of Stonehurst. Lady Camilla's laughter was loud and brittle, echoing in the halls. Her gowns were a riot of colour, her perfume overpowering. She treated the staff with a casual disdain that set Alaric's teeth on edge, issuing contradictory orders and complaining about the quality of the service. "Really, Alaric," she said one evening at dinner, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the rim of her wine glass. "The staff here seems so provincial. One would think you were in the wilds of Scotland, not a day's ride from London." Alaric's mother, the Dowager Duchess Eleonora, a woman with eyes as sharp as her son's and a tongue to match, raised a delicate eyebrow. "The staff at Stonehurst are known for their loyalty and discretion, Camilla, qualities that are, perhaps, of more lasting value than fashionable polish." Lady Camilla flushed, but recovered quickly. "Of course, Duchess. I only mean that Alaric deserves the very best." Her eyes slid to him, a possessive, calculating look that he had once found tolerable, and now found suffocating. The contrast between Camilla and Ilara was a chasm. Where Camilla demanded attention, Ilara seemed to repel it. Where Camilla's conversation was a series of witty barbs and gossip, Ilara's silence was filled with unspoken understanding. The break-in point came one rainy afternoon. Alaric, seeking refuge from Camilla's incessant chatter, had retreated to the library. He was standing at the window, watching the rain slant across the gardens, when the door opened. He expected a footman, but it was Ilara. It was her library day. She froze when she saw him, her hand on the door, a feather duster in her other hand. She looked like a startled fawn, ready to bolt. "Your Grace," she murmured, her eyes downcast. "Forgive me. I will come back later." "No," he said, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone. "Stay. It is your time." She hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door softly. She moved to the far side of the room, keeping a vast continent of books and furniture between them. She began her work, her movements small and efficient. The room was filled with the sound of the rain, the crackle of the fire, and the soft whisk of her duster. It was a peaceful sound, a domestic sound. It was a sound he had never heard in this room before. He found himself speaking, not wanting the silence to be broken by anyone but him. "Are you enjoying the book on botany?" She started, surprised that he would speak to her so directly. "Yes, Your Grace. I never knew there were so many names for wildflowers. There is an old walled garden on the east side of the estate. It has been neglected for years. The flowers there have grown wild. You might find it interesting." Her head came up, and for the first time in his presence, a genuine, unguarded smile touched her lips. It transformed her face, lighting it from within. It was like watching the sun break through clouds. "Thank you, Your Grace. I would like that very much." The smile was a revelation. It was a thing of pure, uncalculated beauty, and he had caused it. The thought sent a strange, unfamiliar warmth through him. The moment was shattered by the library door bursting open. Lady Camilla stood there, her face a mask of playful annoyance. "Alaric, there you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. Mother says we must decide on the guest list for the autumn ball, and—" She trailed off, her eyes falling on Elara. Her gaze swept over the plain grey dress, the duster, the simple, earnest face. Her expression hardened into one of contemptuous dismissal. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Alaric's back went rigid. "This is Elara Vance," he said, his voice dangerously level. "She is a member of my staff." "Well, can she not dust some other time?" Camilla waved a dismissive hand. "The room smells of polish. Send her away." Before Alaric could respond, Elara spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "As you wish, my lady." She curtsied, her eyes on the floor, and turned to leave. "Stay," Alaric commanded. The word was like a steel bar dropped in the room. Elara froze. Camilla turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Alaric, what on earth—" "Elara is here at my invitation," he said, a deliberate falsehood that was truer than the truth. "We were discussing the estate's gardens, a subject, I assure you, of far greater importance than your mother's seating chart." The insult was direct and brutal. Camilla paled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked from Alaric's cold, implacable face to Elara's still, downcast one. In that moment, she saw not a duke and a servant. She saw a man and a woman, and an invisible wall that excluded her. Her eyes narrowed, and the look she gave Elara was filled with a venom that was startling in its intensity. It was a look that promised retribution. "Very well," Camilla said, her voice tight with fury. "Discuss your wildflowers, but do not think this conversation is over, Alaric." She turned on her heel and swept from the room, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was profound. Elara stood with her back to him, her shoulders tense. He had defended her. He had humiliated the woman everyone expected him to marry, for the sake of a laundress. The world had just tilted on its axis. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You should not have done that." "She was rude," he stated, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "She is to be your duchess. I am. Nothing. You have made an enemy for me." He walked towards her, stopping just behind her. He could smell the faint, clean scent of soap and fresh air that clung to her. "No," he said, his voice low and intense. "I have made an enemy of her. There is a difference." She turned then, and her eyes were filled with a fear he had not seen even when his rifle was pointed at her heart. But this was not fear for herself. It was fear for him. And that, more than anything, undid him. "Please be careful, Your Grace," she said. He looked down at her, at this small, quiet woman who had inadvertently turned his world upside down. He saw her courage, her compassion, her quiet dignity. He saw the woman who had stepped in front of a stag, and the woman who had smiled at the thought of wild flowers, and the woman who now feared for him. And in that moment, the Duke of Westmarch knew he was in very deep, very dangerous trouble. The transaction he had planned for his life was no longer acceptable. He wanted something more. He wanted something real. He wanted the impossible. The Dowager Duchess Eleanora arrived at Stonehurst like a cool front moving in to break a spell of humid, oppressive weather. She travelled with only her lady's maid and a mountain of luggage, and her arrival, unannounced, sent a ripple of panic through the household staff, and a wave of irritation across Lady Camilla's perfectly composed features. Eleanora was a woman forged in the crucible of court politics. She had been a celebrated beauty in her youth, but unlike many of her contemporaries, she had not allowed her mind to atrophy. She was whip-smart, observant, and possessed a bullshit detector of formidable accuracy. She loved her son, but she was not blind to his flaws, his coldness, his pride, his emotional isolation. She knew they were shields he had forged in a lonely childhood, but she feared they would become his cage. She found her son in the library, of course. It was his fortress. "Mother," Alaric said, rising from his desk. There was surprise in his voice, but also a hint of relief. "We did not expect you." "The best arrivals are always unexpected," she said, allowing him to kiss her cheek. She pulled off her gloves and surveyed the room, her sharp eyes taking in everything. "And I find the air in London has become dreadfully stale. I required a change of scenery. From the looks of it, so do you." She peered at him closely. "You look unsettled, Alaric. It's an improvement." Before he could formulate a reply, Lady Camilla swept in, a vision in silk, and feigned delight. "Duchess, what a wonderful surprise. Had we known you were coming, we would have prepared a proper welcome." "A proper welcome usually involves a great deal of fuss and discomfort," Eleanora replied dryly, her gaze sweeping over Camilla. "I prefer to arrive as I live, on my own terms. You are looking well, Camilla. Ambition becomes you." It was a compliment with the sharp, hidden edge of a razor, and both women knew it. The Dowager Duchess settled into the rhythm of the house, but she was not a passive observer. She was a general, surveying a battlefield. She saw the way Camilla clung to Alaric's arm, her laughter a little too loud, her smiles a little too bright. She saw the way her son endured Camilla's presence with a polite, frozen patience that was more insulting than open hostility. And she saw the moments when his eyes would drift, his attention snagged by something or someone else. It did not take her long to identify the source of the disturbance. She first saw Ilara in the hall carrying a basket of mending. There was nothing remarkable about the girl at first glance. Plain dress, simple hair, downcast eyes. But there was a stillness about her, a self-contained dignity that was unusual in a servant. Then she saw Alaric pass the girl in the hallway. He did not speak to her, did not even nod. But for a fleeting moment, the mask of ducal indifference slipped. and his mother saw a look of raw, unguarded awareness on his face. It was the look of a man noticing the sun for the first time. Intrigued, Eleanora began her own quiet investigation. She spoke to Mrs. Gable, ostensibly about the household accounts, but her questions were deft and indirect. She learned of the girl's diligence, her 5 years of silent, flawless service. And then, with a bit of gentle prodding, she heard the story of the hunt. She did what? Eleanora asked, her teacup pausing halfway to her lips. Mrs. Gable recounted the tale in her flat, factual manner, ending with, "His Grace was furious, dismissed her on the spot, then summoned her here, to this very room, and rescinded the order. Hasn't spoken a word of it since." Eleanora's lips curved into a genuine, delighted smile. Good heavens, the girl has a spine. She is a good girl, Mrs. Gable said, a note of protectiveness in her voice. Quiet, keeps to herself. The quiet ones are always the most interesting, the dowager murmured, more to herself than to the housekeeper. She decided it was time to meet this paragon of quiet courage. She did not summon Ilara. Instead, she sought her out. Remembering Alaric's strange comment about wildflowers, she had a footman show her the way to the old walled garden on the east side of the estate. It was, as her son had said, a place of beautiful neglect. Roses grew in tangled profusion, their scent heavy in the air. Lavender and foxglove pushed up between the cracked flagstones. It was a garden that had forgotten its duty to be orderly, and had remembered its joy in being alive. And there, sitting on a weathered stone bench, was Ilara Vance. She was not idle. She had a small basket beside her, and was carefully trimming deadheads from a sprawling rosebush with a pair of shears she must have borrowed from the gardener. Eleanora approached quietly. "It is a lovely spot, is it not?" Ilara shot to her feet, her eyes wide with alarm. She dropped into a deep curtsy. "Your Grace, I am sorry. I did not mean to be away from my duties." "Nonsense," Eleanora said, waving a dismissive hand. "Consider this a duty. The garden is much improved by your presence. May I?" She indicated the space on the bench. Ilara, looking flustered, quickly wiped the bench with her apron. The Dowager Duchess sat, her silk gown rustling. She patted the stone beside her. "Sit, child. My neck is not what it once was. I dislike having to crane it." Hesitantly, Ilara sat on the very edge of the bench, her back ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My son tells me you have an interest in botany," Eleanora began, her tone conversational. "His Grace is very kind to allow me the use of his library, Your Grace." "My son is many things, Ilara. Kind is not a word I would have chosen. Until recently." Eleanora turned her sharp gaze on the girl. "You stood in front of his rifle." It was not a question. Ilara's gaze dropped to her hands. "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" It was the same question Alaric had asked, but from the Dowager it felt different. Less of an interrogation, more of a genuine inquiry. "It did not seem right, Your Grace, that something so alive should be ended for sport. And you were willing to have your own life ended for that conviction?" Ilara looked up, and her eyes were clear and direct. "I did not believe he would shoot me, Your Grace." "You did not?" Eleanora was taken aback. "Why ever not?" "Because his eyes, when he looked at the stag, were full of admiration. You do not destroy what you admire. Not really. You seek to possess it. But you do not truly wish it gone from the world." She paused, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "I am sorry. I speak out of turn." Eleanora stared at her. The girl had seen into the heart of her proud, cold son with a clarity that was staggering. She had understood him in a way no one else, not even his own mother, had ever quite managed. "No," Eleanora said softly. "You do not speak out of turn. You speak the truth. A rare and dangerous habit." She was silent for a moment, studying the girl's earnest face. "Lady Camilla does not like you." Elara flinched. "I have tried to stay out of her way, Your Grace. Camilla's way is a very broad path. It is difficult to avoid. She believes my son's interest in you is improper." "There is no improper interest, Your Grace," Elara said, her voice low but firm. "His Grace has been a kind and distant master. He has offered me the loan of his books. That is all." "Is it?" Eleanora asked gently. Elara's composure finally cracked. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "I do not know what it is, Your Grace, but I know that it is impossible. He is the Duke, and I am a laundress. There is a gulf between us that cannot be crossed." "The world is full of gulfs, child," the Dowager said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Most of them are of our own making. What you see as a chasm, another might see as a mere stepping stone." She reached out and placed her hand over Elara's rough, chapped ones. "You are a good woman, Elara Vance. Do not let anyone, not Camilla, not my son, and certainly not the world, make you believe you are anything less." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at a gallop. A moment later, a groom came running into the garden, his face pale. "Your Grace, the Dowager." "There's been an accident in the village. A fever's broken out in the tenants' cottages. Little Tom, the blacksmith's boy, he's taken terribly ill." Before Eleanora could even respond, Elara was on her feet. Her earlier distress was gone, replaced by a look of calm competence. "What kind of fever?" she asked the groom. "A hot fever, miss. Raging. The physician has been sent for, but he's miles away in the next town." "There's a cooling tea to be made from willow bark," Elara said, already moving toward the garden gate. "And feverfew for the headache. I know where they grow." She turned to the Dowager. "Forgive me, Your Grace." And she was gone, running down the path towards the woods, her basket forgotten on the bench. Eleanora watched her go, a slow smile spreading across her face. She turned to the stunned groom. "Well, what are you waiting for? Go and tell my son that his laundress is, once again, doing the work of an angel, and that he would be a fool not to follow her." Alaric, hearing the news, did not hesitate. He ordered his own horse saddled and galloped towards the village, his mind a storm of anxiety. A fever in the crowded tenants' cottages could spread like wildfire. But beneath the ducal concern for his people was a sharper, more personal fear. A fear for the woman who had run towards the danger without a second thought. He found the blacksmith's cottage shrouded in a tense silence. Inside, the air was thick and close. The blacksmith's wife was weeping in a corner, while her husband, a giant of a man, stood helpless, his huge hands hanging uselessly at his sides. And in the center of the small, dim room was Elara. She was kneeling by the small cot where the boy lay, his face flushed and his breathing ragged. She was not panicking. She was wiping his forehead with a cool, damp cloth, her movements calm and efficient. A small pot simmered on the hearth, filling the room with a bitter, herbal scent. She looked up as the Duke filled the doorway, and there was no surprise on her face, only a flicker of relief. "Your Grace," she said, her voice low and steady. His fever is high, but his breathing is steady. I have given him a tea from willow bark. It will help." Alaric came further into the room, his fine leather boots seeming absurdly out of place on the rough-hewn floor. He looked at the sick child, then at Ilara. She had taken command of the chaos, her quiet competence a beacon in the terrified household. "The physician is on his way," he said. "That is good," she replied, her attention already back on the boy. But the fever will not wait for him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching her. He was the master of all this, the man with the power of life and death, of wealth and ruin. But in this small, dim room, he was utterly useless. She was the one with the real power, the power of knowledge, of compassion, of healing. She was tending to his people, not because it was her duty, but because it was her nature. He saw the blacksmith and his wife looking at him, their eyes filled with a desperate hope. They looked to him for a miracle, for a ducal command that could turn back sickness. And all he could do was stand there. He made a decision. "I will send for my own physician from London," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "He will bring the latest medicines. We will spare no expense." He looked at the blacksmith. "Your son will have the best care in England." The woman sobbed with gratitude. The blacksmith bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Grace." "God bless you, Your Grace." But Alaric was not looking at them. He was looking at Ilara. And in her clear, steady eyes, he saw not admiration, but a flicker of something else. Pity? Disappointment? She rose and came to him, her voice so low only he could hear. "Your Grace, the best care in England is not what this child needs. He needs his fever cooled. He needs to be kept comfortable. He needs his mother and father not to be terrified. Your promises of London physicians are for you, not for them. It is a way for you to feel powerful in a place where your power means nothing." The words were a bucket of ice water. She had, once again, seen right through him, through the ducal pronouncements to the man beneath, who was helpless and afraid. He felt a flush of anger, then a wave of profound shame. She was right. "What should I do?" he asked, the question torn from him. It was the most honest thing he had said in years. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You could hold his hand, Your Grace." The blacksmith. "He's trying so hard to be strong. He's about to break." Alaric turned. He looked at the mountain of a man, his face a mask of stoic agony. He, the Duke of Westmarch, walked over to his tenant, a man he barely knew, and placed a hand on his shoulder. The blacksmith flinched, then looked at the Duke, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. "He's a strong boy," Alaric said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "He will fight." The blacksmith's composure finally broke. A great shuddering sob escaped him, and he nodded, unable to speak. Alaric kept his hand on the man's shoulder, a silent, solid presence. And from across the room, Ilara Vance watched him, and this time the look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated warmth. He had not given an order. He had offered comfort. He had not acted like a duke. He had acted like a man, and it had made all the difference. The arrival of the London physician 2 days later was an anticlimax. By the time he bustled in, full of his own importance, little Tom's fever had already broken. The willow bark tea, the cool cloths, and Ilara's calm presence had worked their quiet magic. The physician made a great show of examining the boy, pronounced him well on the mend, and accepted the Duke's lavish fee with a self-satisfied smile, quietly taking credit for a victory that was not his. Alaric saw the injustice of it, but he said nothing. He was learning that some of the most important battles were fought in silence. His victory was not in the physician's report, but in the memory of the blacksmith's grateful, tear-streaked face, and in the quiet nod of approval Ilara had given him before she slipped away from the cottage. Her work done. The incident, however, had consequences. Lady Camilla was incensed. "You rode into a fever-ridden cottage?" she demanded of him that evening, her voice shrill. "For a blacksmith's brat? Have you lost your mind, Alaric? What if you had caught it? The Duke of Westmarch, laid low by a peasant's ailment. Can you imagine the scandal?" "I can imagine it," the Dowager Duchess interjected, looking up from her needlepoint. "It would be dreadfully inconvenient. Almost as inconvenient as a future Duchess who values her fiancé's title more than his life, and his life less than the lives of his people." Camilla's face tightened. "That is not fair. I am concerned for His Grace's welfare." "You are concerned for the welfare of His Grace's title, which you hope to one day share," Eleonora corrected her calmly. "There is a difference." The atmosphere in Stonehurst grew thick with unspoken tensions. Camilla, realizing she was losing ground, shifted her tactics. If she could not control Alaric, she would eliminate the source of his distraction. Her hostility towards Ilara, once a matter of disdainful glances and snide remarks, sharpened into a focused, malicious campaign. A bucket of soapy water was accidentally spilled on a freshly polished floor just as Ilara was passing, causing her to slip and badly bruise her arm. A delicate lace collar, part of Camilla's own laundry, was found to have a small, deliberate tear, and Ilara was subjected to a humiliating interrogation by a furious Lady Camilla in front of the other servants. A treasured book in the library, one Alaric had left for her, was found with its spine broken. Ilara endured it all with her quiet, infuriating dignity. She did not complain. She did not tattle. She simply absorbed the petty cruelties and carried on, her silence a more powerful rebuke than any angry words could have been. Mrs. Gable saw what was happening and tried to shield her, reassigning her duties to keep her away from the main house. But Camilla's reach was long. Alaric saw it too. He saw the new, wary tension in Ilara's shoulders, the faint bruise on her arm, the way she would flinch when Lady Camilla entered a room, and it stoked a cold, protective rage within him. He was the Duke. This was his house. And a guest, a woman he was supposed to marry, was tormenting one of his people under his own roof. One evening, he found Ilara in the walled garden. It had become their unspoken meeting place. She was not tending the flowers this time, but sitting on the stone bench, her head bowed, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. He approached softly. "Ilara." She looked up, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. She tried to muster a smile, but it faltered. "Your Grace." He sat on the bench beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them, though he wanted to close it. He wanted to reach out, to smooth the worried line from her brow. He did neither. "She is making your life impossible," he said, the statement flat. "Lady Camilla is a guest in your house," Ilara replied, her voice carefully neutral. "She is accustomed to a certain standard. This is not about standards. This is about cruelty." He turned to her, his voice low and urgent. You do not have to endure this. Tell me what she has done. I will put a stop to it." She looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. "And how would you do that, Your Grace?" "You would confront her. She would deny it. You would create a scene. You would humiliate the woman your world expects you to marry. And for what? To defend a laundress? You would make me the talk of the county, the source of a scandal. I would become a weapon for her to use against you. No. The only way to win a game like this is not to play." He stared at her, silenced by the simple, devastating logic of her words. She was protecting him, again, from the consequences of his own world, his own choices. "It should not be this way," he said, the words torn from him. "In my own house." "Your house is not the world, Your Grace," she said gently. "And the world is not a kind place for women like me, or for men like you, who are trapped by their titles." She gave him a small, sad smile. "We are both in cages. Yours is just gilded." He had no answer to that. He looked at her, this woman of quiet strength and profound wisdom, and the gulf between them seemed both immense and utterly insignificant. Duke and laundress, gilded cage and grey servitude. What did any of it matter in the face of the truth he could no longer deny? He loved her. The realization did not strike him like lightning. It settled over him like the dusk, a slow, inevitable, and peaceful certainty. He loved her courage. He loved her compassion. He loved the quiet sanctuary of her presence. He loved the way she saw him, the man, not the title. And in that moment of absolute clarity, he knew what he had to do. It was terrifying. It was radical. It was an act that would shatter the foundations of his world. It was, he realized with a grim smile, the only thing that would set them both free. But before he could speak, before he could give voice to the monumental decision taking shape in his soul, Lady Camilla played her final, desperate card. She chose her moment with theatrical precision. During a small, formal dinner party Alaric was hosting for a few local dignitaries. Camilla, stunning in a gown of crimson silk, had been sparkling all evening, the perfect hostess-in-waiting. The final course had been cleared. The port was being passed. The conversation was low and convivial. "I have the most wonderful news," Camilla announced, her voice ringing with false modesty, capturing the attention of the entire table. She placed her hand possessively on Alaric's arm. "Alaric and I have finally set a date. We are to be married in the spring." The table erupted in congratulations. Glasses were raised. Toasts were made. The future of the Duchy of Westmarch was being celebrated. Alaric sat frozen, a prisoner at his own table. He looked at Camilla, at her triumphant, smiling face, and felt a wave of nausea. He looked at his mother, whose face was a mask of cold fury. He looked at the happy, oblivious faces of his guests. He had been checkmated. To deny it now, here, would be a catastrophic insult, a declaration of war against her and her powerful family. He said nothing. His silence was taken as assent. Later that night, he found his mother in the library. She was not doing her needlepoint. She was standing by the fire, her arms crossed, her expression grim. "You let her do it," she said without preamble. "You let that grasping, manipulative little creature corner you in your own home." "What was I to do?" he asked, his voice raw. "Cause a scene? Humiliate her in front of Lord Ashworth?" "Yes," his mother snapped. "You are a duke. Your will is supposed to be law, not a suggestion to be debated. You should have stood up and said, 'Lady Camilla is mistaken. and let the consequences be damned. Instead, you sat there like a trussed pheasant. It is not so simple. It is precisely that simple. You are allowing your life to be dictated by a woman you do not love, whom you do not even respect, all for the sake of a convention you no longer believe in. And in doing so, you are breaking the heart of a woman who is worth 10 of her. Alaric flinched as if struck. Elara. Do not say her name, his mother commanded, her voice softening slightly. She deserves better than to be a secret you keep. The news of your engagement is all over the house. Every servant is whispering. Can you imagine what she is feeling right now? He could, and the thought was a knife in his gut. He had sat in silence to avoid a public scandal, and in doing so, he had committed a private, unforgivable betrayal. He turned and strode towards the door. Where are you going? His mother called after him. To fix it, he said, his voice grim. But it was too late. The damage was done. The next morning, Mrs. Gable came to him, her face pale and set. She's gone, Your Grace. Gone? Alaric's blood ran cold. Camilla? No, Your Grace. Mrs. Gable's voice was filled with a quiet accusation. Elara Vance. Her bed was not slept in. A small bundle of her things is missing from her room. She has left. The house felt empty. It was a vast, cavernous, echoing emptiness that the presence of dozens of servants, his mother, and the triumphant Lady Camilla could not fill. Stonehurst, his ancestral home, the seat of his power, felt like a tomb. Alaric's first reaction was a blind, ducal fury. He sent out riders. He had the grounds searched. He dispatched men to the local village, to the coaching inn, to every cottage and farm within a 10-mile radius. He would find her. He would bring her back. He would command it. But as the hours turned into a day, and the day into 2, and every search party returned empty-handed, his anger slowly curdled into a cold, hollow despair. She had not been taken. She had vanished. She had slipped away in the night like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but the gaping hole in his life. He had driven her away. His silence at the dinner table had been a shout of betrayal, and she had heard it. She had believed the lie. She had accepted the world's verdict, that he belonged to Camilla, that there was no place for her here. And so she had removed herself with the same quiet, self-effacing dignity with which she did everything. Lady Camilla was insufferably smug. Good riddance, she declared. The girl was a troublemaker. The staff will be much more settled without her agitations. Alaric looked at her, at the petty cruelty in her beautiful face, and felt nothing. Not hatred, not anger, just a vast, weary distance. He was looking at a stranger. The engagement is off, Camilla, he said, his voice flat and dead. She stared at him, her smile faltering. What? Don't be ridiculous, Alaric. We are the talk of the ton. Then let them talk, he said, turning away from her. I will not marry you. Not now. Not ever. You may tell your father whatever you wish. Blame my madness. Blame a sudden affliction of the soul. I do not care. But we are finished. He walked out of the room, leaving her sputtering in his wake, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. He felt no satisfaction in it. It was merely a piece of unpleasant business that had to be done. His mother found him hours later in the library, staring into the fire. He had not eaten. He had not slept. He was simply waiting, though for what, he did not know. She's a clever girl, the dowager said softly, coming to stand beside him. Alaric did not look at her. She's gone. She knew you would search the immediate area. She knew you would use your power and your resources. So she has gone where they cannot reach. She has made herself invisible again. Eleonora sighed. I misjudged her. I thought she was a fighter, but she has chosen flight. She was protecting me, Alaric said, his voice hoarse, from scandal, from myself. Perhaps, his mother conceded, or perhaps she was protecting herself from a world that has no place for a duchess who was once a laundress, from a man who sat silent while another woman claimed him. The words were a dagger, but they were true. A week passed, then 2. Life at Stonehurst was a hollow charade. Camilla and her mother departed in a flurry of outrage and recriminations, leaving a blessed silence in their wake. But it was not the right kind of silence. It was not the peaceful, companionable silence he had shared with Alara. It was the silence of absence. Alaric retreated into himself, becoming the cold, remote duke he had been before, but now it was a shell protecting a hollow core. He went through the motions of his life. He managed his estate. He answered his correspondence. He sat alone in his vast dining room, the food tasteless in his mouth. He spent his nights in the library, surrounded by the books they had shared. He would pick one up, a volume of poetry, a history, and see the ghost of her standing there, her head bowed in concentration, a faint, secret smile on her lips. The room was a museum of his failure. His mother watched him, her heart aching. She saw her proud, powerful son being consumed by a grief he did not know how to name. One night, she came to him in the library. She was carrying a small, worn book. It was Pilgrim's Progress. This was found in her room, the dowager said, placing it on the desk beside him. Tucked under the mattress. It seems she left in more of a hurry than we thought. Alaric picked it up. The cover was soft with age. He opened it. The pages were filled with her neat, careful handwriting, marginalia, and notes. But that was not what caught his eye. Tucked between the pages were pressed flowers, dozens of them. Each one was carefully labelled in her small, precise script. Foxglove from the walled garden, wild rose from the lane, willow from the riverbank. It was a hidden map of her world, a secret diary of beauty. And then a small, folded piece of paper fell out. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. It was not a letter. It was a drawing, a simple charcoal sketch, but rendered with astonishing skill and tenderness. It was the great stag, not as a trophy, not as a beast, but as a king in his own domain, his head high, his eyes intelligent and proud. It was the stag as she had seen it, as she had saved it. Beneath the drawing was a single line of text, a quote. Some birds are not meant to be caged, that's all. Their feathers are too bright, their songs too sweet and wild. It was not from any of the books he had given her. It was something else, something she had found, something she believed. And in that moment, Alaric understood. He had been trying to find her, to bring her back, to cage her in his world as his duchess. He had been thinking like a duke, a collector of beautiful things. He had wanted to possess her. But Alara Vance was not a thing to be possessed. She was a wild, free spirit, and he had almost crushed her with the weight of his world. To love her was not to own her. It was to let her be free, even if it meant living without her. He looked at his mother, and for the first time in weeks, the fog of despair in his eyes began to clear, replaced by a new, quiet resolve. I have been a fool, he said. Yes, his mother agreed calmly. But you are my fool, and you have a good heart beneath the ducal nonsense. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" He did not answer immediately. He picked up the drawing of the stag and looked at it, truly looked at it. He saw not just an animal, but a symbol of everything he had almost destroyed. He had to find her, not to capture her, not to command her, but to ask, to beg if necessary, and to prove that he could be a man worthy of her, not a duke who required her. "I am going to stop looking for a laundress," he said. "And I am going to start looking for an artist, a botanist, a woman who understands the hearts of men and beasts." He looked around the library, at the thousands of books, the maps of the world. She is out there, and she is not invisible. Not anymore. Not to me. He did not know where to start. The world was a vast place, but for the first time since she had left, he felt not despair, but a flicker of hope. The hunt was on again. But this time, the prize was not a trophy for his wall. It was a partner for his soul. And he would not use a rifle. He would use his heart. The annual Stonehurst Autumn Ball had, for generations, been the pinnacle of the county's social calendar. This year, however, a different kind of anticipation hung in the air. The scandal of the Duke of Westmarch's broken engagement to Lady Camilla Beaumont was still fresh, and the Tun was ravenous for the next chapter of the drama. They were to be disappointed. The Duke was a changed man, but not in the way they expected. He was not a tragic, romantic figure. He was simply quiet. He had spent the past 2 months away from Stonehurst, a fact that had fueled 1,000 rumors. Some said he was nursing a broken heart in seclusion. Others, that he was pursuing some new, mysterious affair on the continent. The truth was far less glamorous. He had been searching. Armed with the small charcoal drawing and the quote that was not from his library, he had begun a new kind of investigation. He had not used his ducal power, but his intelligence. The quote, after some research with a bookseller in London, was traced to a rather sentimental but popular play that had recently been performed. The drawing style was amateur, but gifted. He had started in London, visiting not the grand galleries, but the small, dusty shops that sold art supplies. He showed the drawing, not as a duke demanding information, but as a man searching for a lost relative. He was met with shrugged shoulders and blank stares. He moved on to the publishing houses, the botanical societies, the libraries. He was looking for a woman with a passion for nature, a gift for drawing, and a quiet, unassuming presence. He was looking for a needle in 1,000 haystacks, and he had found nothing. He had returned to Stonehurst for the ball, not in triumph, but in quiet defeat. He had done his duty, greeted his guests, and now stood on the edge of the glittering ballroom, a stranger in his own home. The music, the laughter, the swirl of colourful gowns, it all seemed like a play being performed on a distant stage. His mother approached him, her face etched with concern. "Alaric, you have been standing here like a statue for an hour. Dance with someone. Smile. At least pretend you are not miserable." "I am not miserable, Mother," he said. And it was true. The despair was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, aching patience. "I am waiting. For a miracle? For her to be cleverer than I am." Just as he said the words, his butler, Mr. Davies, approached him, a silver salver in his hand. "A note for you, Your Grace." It was delivered to the kitchens. Alaric's heart stopped. The kitchens, not the front door. He took the small, folded piece of paper. It was not fine, watermarked stationery. It was simple, thick paper. His hands were perfectly steady as he opened it. The note contained only 3 words. The walled garden. He did not run. The Duke of Westmarch did not run. But every line of his body strained with the effort of walking at a measured pace. He moved through the throngs of guests, murmuring apologies, ignoring their curious stares. He pushed open the French doors that led to the terrace and strode out into the cool night air. He followed the familiar path, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The music of the ballroom faded behind him, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. The moon was high and full, bathing the garden in a silvery light. The gate to the walled garden was ajar. He pushed it open. The garden was transformed. It was no longer a place of beautiful neglect. It was a masterpiece of quiet artistry. The paths had been cleared and lined with glowing lanterns. The roses had been tamed just enough to enhance their beauty. The air was thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. And in the center of the garden, on the stone bench where his mother had spoken to her, she sat. Elara. She was not wearing a laundress's grey dress. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, the color of the twilight sky. It was not silk or satin, but a soft, fine wool that draped gracefully. Her hair was not pulled back in a severe bun, but arranged in a simple but elegant coil at the nape of her neck, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She was not a duchess in disguise. She was simply herself, amplified. She rose as he approached, her hands clasped before her, just as they had been in the forest clearing. But this time, her eyes were not just steady. They were shining. Elara. He breathed her name. It was a prayer. Your Grace, she replied, her voice the same quiet melody he had heard in his dreams for months. He stopped a few feet from her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had 100 questions. Where had she been? How had she arranged this? How had she found the courage to return? But they all seemed insignificant in the face of the one question that mattered. Why did you leave? He asked, his voice raw. Because you were silent, she said simply, without accusation. And your silence was louder than Lady Camilla's announcement. I thought I was saving you from a scandal, but I was also saving myself from a life spent as your secret, your weakness. I could not be that. You were never my weakness, Elara, he said, taking a step closer. You were my strength. You were the only real thing in my life. I had to find out if I could be a real thing on my own, she said. I went to London. I found work. Not as a laundress. A small, proud smile touched her lips. A man who ran a small bookshop. He saw your drawing of the stag, which I had with me. He hired me to illustrate a children's book about woodland creatures. It all clicked into place. The play. The quote. I saw it, she admitted. On my half-day off. The bookseller took me. He has been a friend. Alaric felt a sharp, irrational pang of jealousy, which he quickly suppressed. And the garden? The dress? I wrote to your mother, Elara confessed, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. I told her my plan. I asked for her help. She sent the money for the gown. She arranged for me to have access to the garden. She told me when the ball was. His mother. Of course, the master strategist. So you came back, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I came back to see which man would be in the garden tonight, she said, her gaze direct and searching. The duke who wishes to possess a beautiful thing, or the man who would let it be free? He closed the distance between them, stopping so close he could see the flecks of green in her grey eyes. He did not touch her. Not yet. That man, he said, his voice shaking with the force of his conviction. The one who looked at you as a possession. He's gone. You killed him that day in the forest. It just took me this long to realize it." He looked at her, at this incredible woman who had faced down his rifle, his anger, his society, and his own foolish pride. She had not returned as a supplicant. She had returned as his equal, a woman who had forged her own path, and now stood before him, offering him a chance to walk it with her. "I do not want to own you, Elara Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to stand beside you. I want to learn the names of all the flowers in this garden with you. I want to see the world through your eyes. I love you, and if you will have me, I want to be your husband." Her composure finally broke. A tear, then another, traced a path through the moonlight on her cheeks. But she was smiling, a brilliant, joyful, radiant smile. "I am a laundress," she whispered, as if testing the words one last time. "You are the woman I love," he countered, "and you will be my duchess. And if anyone in this god-forsaken county has a problem with that," he said, a ghost of his old ducal arrogance returning, but this time tempered with love, "they will have to answer to me." He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Marry me, Elara." "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Alaric." She said his name, his given name, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or possession, but of homecoming. It was a kiss of quiet promises and shared sanctuaries. A kiss that sealed a pact made long ago in a sun-dappled forest clearing. The Duke and the laundress, the Stag and the Saviour, two souls who had found each other across an impossible gulf, not by bridging it, but by realizing it was never there at all. In the distance, the music of the ballroom swelled, a soundtrack for a world that was about to be turned upside down. But here, in the secret garden, under the watchful eye of the moon, their own world had just been made right. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Duchess of Westmarch stood on the great lawn of Stonehurst, watching her husband. The transformation in him was still a source of quiet wonder to her. The cold, hard edges of the Duke she had first met had been softened, not by weakness, but by a deep and abiding happiness. He laughed now, a real, uninhibited sound that often sent the stable hands scrambling in surprise. He smiled with his eyes, and he held her hand in public. Elara herself had not changed, but had bloomed. She wore the title of Duchess as she had worn her laundress's uniform, with a quiet, unassuming dignity that commanded more respect than any haughty airs could have. The staff, who had first been wary, now adored her. She knew all their names, their children's names, their small joys and sorrows. She had shortened the impossibly long dining table, replacing it with a round one, so that we might all see each other. She had turned the disused East Wing into a school for the tenants' children. Stonehurst, once a fortress, had become a home. The society that had been so scandalized by their union had, for the most part, been brought to heel by the combined forces of the Duke's unyielding devotion and the Dowager Duchess's formidable social power. Any lady who dared a slight against the new Duchess found her invitations mysteriously lost, her social prospects suddenly withered. It was amazing, Elara thought, how quickly principles could be swayed by the fear of being left out. Alaric came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I was thinking about how much has changed," she said, leaning back against him. And what has not, he added. He pointed towards the edge of the woods. There, at the tree line, stood a magnificent stag. Its antlers were a great crown against the evening sky. It watched them for a long moment, its dark eyes calm and intelligent. It was the king of the wood. Alara's heart filled with a quiet joy. He is still here. Of course he is, Alaric said. He is the guardian of this place. A reminder. A reminder of a girl in a plain grey dress, of a man with a rifle, and of the moment a choice was made. Not to kill, but to understand. Not to possess, but to cherish. The stag held their gaze for another moment, then turned with a flick of its white tail and melted back into the shadows of the forest. It was not a farewell. It was a benediction. Alaric turned her in his arms, his storm-grey eyes soft in the fading light. I love you, Alara, Duchess of Westmarch. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. And I love you, Alaric, my duke, my husband, my friend. He was the same man she had seen through the rifle sight all that time ago. But now she saw all of him, the pride and the strength, the vulnerability and the grace. And he, in turn, saw all of her. Not the laundress, not the duchess, but Alara. And to be truly seen, she had discovered, was the greatest love story of all. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.